Respected ladies and gentlemen, Jai Jinendra and Jai Shri Krishna. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nemish K. Mehta, and I'm an executive committee member of Non-Atmonic Association of UK. Today, I'm truly honored and privileged to be asked to welcome this amazing panel of professionals we have to give you an expert advice on the COVID-19 vaccine. I'd like to introduce the panel. We have 4 speakers and a moderator. Firstly, we have Dr. Anuja Shah. She's a GP at Whitfield Surgery in Luton. Her special interests are in diabetes and women's health. Tonight, Dr. Anuja will be our moderator, so I request you all to use the chat function for any questions that you may have and will be answered by the panel during the Q&A. Next up is Dr. Mala Dalal. She's an experienced GP based in Harrow. Dr. Mala is very much interested in plant-based diet and lifestyle medicine, which is in alignment with her family values and Jain principles of Ahimsa. We then have Dr. Rajvi Punathar. She has worked in the field of cancer research for over 20 years and is currently a principal laboratory research scientist at Francis Crick Institute in London. Within the wider UK Gujarati community, Rajvi is better known as a singer specializing in Gujarati folk music and is also current chair of the charity Sansar, which promotes the learning of Gujarati language and culture through fun and music. We also have Dr. Raj Mehta. He was trained as a scientist in immunology and is currently an entrepreneur in residence at Apple Tree Partners. Prior to this, Raj spent nearly 18 years at Cancer Research UK, where he held a variety of leadership roles. He's a keen Navnati, and many of you would recognize seeing him during Parisian celebrations at Navnat Center. And finally, we have Dr. Amit Bakai. This man needs no introduction as he's a regular speaker at many events in our community. Dr. Amit is a consultant cardiologist and cardiovascular R&D director at the Royal Free London NHS Trust, UK, a Harvard scholar and a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians and the European Society of Cardiology. He's a founder, author, and has published over 100 papers and received a national award for a decade of work. On behalf of all of us here, I would like to thank the panel for taking the time out and coming onto our platform to talk on this very important subject. I would now hand over the platform to Dr. Amit to kick off this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raj. Nemish, I'm so sorry. Isn't it funny? It doesn't matter how many degrees you have. You can still get nervous whenever you're talking to your families and your friends, right? And so that's the usual scenario. Okay. So this is really thanks to Raj, my good colleague and friend who's going to speak very shortly, that this has all been inspired. A group of us were talking about fake news. A group of us were talking about our responsibilities to our parents, our grandparents, our children. And we needed to understand what is the expert evidence we can give and what are the problems with the community. The most fundamental thing that ties us all together, from Nemish right through to all of us, is this aspect here, that we have Jain ethics underlying everything. We are so lucky that those 3 jewels of Jain tenets, which are right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct, are something that's interwoven into our DNA. We are hardwired for those Jain ethical principles. When that happens and a medical situation arrives, I have a heart attack, do I need a bypass? The 3 questions that always arise is, who do I trust? What is the truth? Am I hearing the truth? And what is the action that we need to take? Now, those 3 aspects are exactly the same as the 3 Jain tenets: the right faith, the right knowledge, and the right conduct. And it's those things that we want to inform you on today to say, you're an amazing community. We really need you to understand this issue of COVID-19 infection. Then we've brought scientists and researchers to tell you about the vaccines. Then we brought the GPs themselves that are going to deliver you the vaccines themselves to say exactly what's going to happen and what we should do in the future. So these three aspects are how we're going to take you through the three tenets of Jainism: the right faith, the right knowledge, and the right conduct. And with that comes the idea that if you stay aware, you stay calm, and you stay safe. These are the three things we want you to take away. We've got through a lot this year. Look at that: earthquakes, forest fires, plagues, riots, isolation, economic downturns. We've gone through a lot, but we're still here, and we're going to carry on being here. So let's talk about our friend, COVID-19. And remember, in Jainism, every soul, every living soul has to be respected. Fascinatingly, a virus only has three functions. It wants to find you, it wants to use you to multiply, because it cannot do that on its own. It's one of these few things that cannot reproduce by itself. It needs us as a parasite to actually create multiples of itself, and then let us actually expand itself to other people. And then it wants to replicate and spread. So that's it. Those are the three functions of a virus. Virus, I want to find somebody that will help me make copies. I'll infect them, and then I'll go out and spread. Very occasionally, it will rest inside that person, so it will sleep, it will lie dormant. Very occasionally, it will mutate, it will change very slightly the form. But those are the three functions. Now, guess what? Every one of us should be able to tolerate a viral infection like COVID-19. The problem is that we sometimes overreact to what it's doing to us. Those photocopies that it wants to make inside our cells, sometimes our cells can't handle the extra energy it's taking and the destruction it leaves. And that's the problem, that we overreact to that damage and that insult. And that's why the vulnerable, the weak, the weakened immune system, the unfit, the sedentary, the people with lung disease, heart disease have a much harder time recovering from this virus. And that's the main problem. Okay, so normally it lives, it may disrupt us. Problem is, it can harm us, it can age us, and it can kill us. This is, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but this is the life cycle that this virus was happily living inside bats and transmitting itself from bats to each other, multiplying, replicating. Then it moved through an armadillo, an anteater, called a pangolin, and we believe through that consumption of pangolins, it's moved through to humans. And it said, fantastic, these guys have fantastically big lungs. I'm going to go inside their lung tissue. I'm going to attach to their lung tissue using my special spike protein that allows me to go inside the lung. I'm going to multiply there, and then I'm going to release myself to other people. Now, this is the scariest fact. If one human being infects two human beings the next day, and those two human beings infect another two human beings, if you keep doubling, in 33 days, you will have reached 8 billion people that will be infected with the virus. In 33 days, the entire planet's human population could become infected if one person infects two others. So that is the sort of statistics we're facing. This is what it does when it moves inside your lung and says, I'm going to use those I'm going to use special receptors called the ACE inhibitors to attach myself, the spike protein, into your lungs. On the left-hand side, in the middle, you've got this beautiful heart, a boot-shaped heart, and then you've got these nice black lungs. And air is easy to move in and out. On the next right-hand side, you can see these shadows, these horrible shadows, where fluid is building up from the viruses damaging them. Now, the picture behind me is the same picture that you would have to walk up in Kilimanjaro to get in that last night, your last 8 to 11 hours of walking, climbing at oxygen saturations of 80%, with the fluid coming out of your nose, freezing in the middle of the night at -20 to reach that sunrise. That same breathlessness where each one step requires one breath is the same thing that some people with COVID-19 will have because their lungs are full of fluid in that X-ray. in more detail, here is a CT scan at the bottom there. You can see lovely black tissue on the left-hand side. Outside, the heart is on the left, and you've got this black tissue with very organized little white structures, which are the blood vessels and the airways. On the right-hand side, you can see this horrible scarring inside those lungs. And so that's what it's doing. The sponge of your lungs is being damaged and crinkled. Now, 85%, 80 to 85% of people will be able to overcome the infection. You can see that mild to moderate illness. And you can see this dashed line of antibodies developing. So you are learning how to recognize this virus, which is not you, and you're mounting a response so it can't infect you again. The problem is that 15% of people will go on to have this serious illness. Now, in general, the incubation period, 5 days, that's a very important time. At 5 days, you will, the first 5 days before even your symptoms, you will be able to transmit and share this virus with other people. So you haven't even realized it's doing anything. Then you start getting your dry cough. Then you start getting your loss of smell and taste. And that's quite unusual that this virus causes. Then you get this fatigue from breathlessness, and you get the fevers, etc. This fatigue and loss of smell is quite unique. Okay, and that's beyond 5 days. Now, a common cold will only take 1 or 2 days for you to get over. A flu infection will take 3 to 4 days. It's only on the 5th day onwards that you start realizing this is not going away. This is a dry cough. You know, what's going on? I'm really absolutely shattered. I cannot even do my work. I cannot even concentrate. I've got brain fog. My muscles are helpless, etc. Some people's indigestion is affected. Their gut is getting diarrhea. They're getting loose motions. They will have COVID-19, and they must get a swab. And you may, if you're unlucky, move into the severe illness phase where you need to go into hospital. You have oxygen, you have ventilation, etc. This is an infographics to say 81% of people, mild disease, no issues whatsoever. The other 19% of people, a quarter of them, unfortunately, will pass away. They will not make it despite ventilation, despite oxygen, despite hospital treatment, etc. And 3/4 of that 19% will require a lot of support, a lot of treatments, and if they get hospitalized, that's the issue. Now, the responsibility here is not only for you to prevent yourself get COVID-19, but the infrastructure, the NHS, the resource pool that's there has to be protected. Because if you're stopping other people, you're using up space that other people need and can't get into, then other people will be unlucky that they're not going to have the resources and the oxygen and the ventilation and the beds that they require. So there is a limitation that we're working with the responsibility not only to look after ourselves, but to look after the rest of the country. And so that's quite an important aspect. Now, acute respiratory distress syndrome means bad lung disease. Now, many of you will say, I'm healthy, I'm young, I don't need to worry. You know, if I'm 18 to 29, I'll get over the infection really quickly, really well. Actually, some of those will have a bad infection. Some of them might be asthmatic, they'll need hospitalization. And actually, we've had deaths in 29-year-olds, parents of 2 and 3 people, because of the clotting that the virus causes. And more importantly, if you then decide to meet your parents or your grandparents, on this graph, you'll see that if you go and meet your parents, 65 to 74 years old, they have a 5 times risk of hospitalization because you may have given them COVID. More importantly, they have a 90 times increased risk of death compared to you. And if you're 75 to 84, your great-grandparent or my grandparent, etc., then you will have a 220 times increased risk of death. So really, it's very important that even though you're young, you're not spreading it to anybody else. And this idea that Boris has had to do a U-turn into lockdown in tier 4, that's a really important thing. Thank goodness that, you know, we had Diwali during lockdown. We didn't meet each other. We didn't do our usual festivals. We were so spared as a community not to have this increased risk of death and hospitalization. Who are the people particularly that we need to worry about that could easily not make it, not survive through COVID? The elderly, those in residential care, men, Black and ethnic minorities. I'll show you a little bit more about that. People who are overweight and unfit. So you have to be the combination of overweight and unfit. If you're fit but overweight, that's okay. If you're overweight, but you've always generally been mobile and you've got great lung tissue and you're doing yoga, all those things, no problem at all. The pregnant people with heart disease, sure. And then, of course, the medical condition, those who have lung disease, those who have diabetes particularly, you'll see a spike in a minute, kidney disease, those on dialysis, really bad news for those sorts of individuals because they're having to go in and out of environments where they may catch COVID as well as be problematical after that. People who've had cancer in the past, people who are currently on cancer therapies, and all of those people that are considered at high risk of COVID, the pneumonia, are also the same people who would be eligible for the vaccines first. So the elderly, the care home people, the people at risk, those are also the same people we're inviting. And you'll see a little bit more from Marla about that. Now, here is the bit I told you about race. Race, you can see here that Asians, particularly Indians, Pakistani, Bangladeshi community colleagues, etc., much higher risk of deaths, not only in the population, not only because of genetic studies, but also particularly as staff. A lot of our community are healthcare workers, and we've had a disproportionate increase in our people in the hospitals working, pharmacists, doctors, physiotherapists, anything, researchers, scientists, catching COVID and dying. And that's probably because we have a genetic predisposition to overreact to the virus, as I mentioned to you earlier. And Raj and Rajvi will go into that a little bit more in detail. But this information is really particularly important to our community, which is why it's a joy that we're doing something as a community group to prevent the infection whatsoever. This is 4 years of data. What you're seeing is that in 1 million diabetics followed up in this country for 4 years, isn't it amazing the amount of data that we have? 1 million people with type 2 diabetes followed out for 4 years. It's a privilege to be in the UK in that setting. You can see every winter there's a spike increase of deaths because of the flu, winter flu season. And the NHS are always preparing for it, and you're having your flu jabs to prevent it. And that's a really important thing. COVID spike, completely 2.5 times as many deaths. And it was just by luck that the April terrible disaster of deaths did not occur on top of a flu winter. But guess what? This flu winter is here now. This is why we've shut down Christmas. This is why we've taken notice. We actually anticipated this, and you anticipated it. And luckily, we're not doing any physical events. We've become a Zoom community, and we can actually live our lives that way adequately, thank goodness. So really important you get your flu jab, and Marla and Anuja will tell you about that very shortly. This is the fact that lockdown works. Okay, in April, March the 23rd, we had announced lockdown, and look at April. We managed to turn a peak that was going up and up and up around the corner, and we stopped those hospitalizations, we stopped those deaths. And thank goodness that we did that lockdown, and actually it works. So when we do give you an instruction to have another tier 4, really be safe, really stop having good conduct, having good behavior, having good discipline, don't be tempted, etc. It works, it will work. Now, what was important is that during this time, there were less people coming into hospital with heart attacks and cancers, and some of it is something we are worried about, that we're not picking those up. So if you are concerned about cancer, please still come in. If you're having a potential chest pain for more than 20 minutes and you're worried about calling the ambulance, don't worry at all. Call the ambulance, come in. We've got safe pathways for people who may or may not be COVID, but are having other problems. Don't sit at home and hide on those symptoms because you're worried about COVID. So 2 things, be safe, but also be attentive to all the other things that could go wrong with you. Don't hide those really important symptoms of chest pain, of weight loss, etc. Now, COVID is not just the pneumonia, not just the lung disease, not just the gut disease, not just the tiredness. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more 1 in 5 people with a bad COVID reaction that's come into hospital, either through outpatients or a bed admission, they're getting symptoms beyond 3 months. And you can be a young person, as young as 19 and 20, and have COVID and get over it in a few days, but 3 months later, you're tired. You've got brain fog, your blood pressure's all over the place, your heart rate is jumping fast. You've got problems with your smell still, and you're not able to eat properly, all of these sorts of things, you're depressed, you can't function properly, you can't have exercise properly, you can't function in relationships properly, and you may even have exams and other pressures, and you're really struggling. So this long COVID has got a name now. Anything beyond 3 months, persisting symptoms of COVID-19 is called long COVID. So these are really important, even if you're a young person, and you think, no, I'll just get COVID, it's going to be much easier for me. Actually, you don't know if you're going to get long COVID. And this is going to be a disaster for you for months and months and months until we've worked out ways to sort that out. So you cannot be complacent, even if you're fit. And that's why vaccine aspects are going to be the thing I'm going to hand over to in a minute. If you want to know anything more, at the Royal Free where we are, we were being filmed for months throughout this period, through March, April, May, etc. So go to these areas, see the BBC. The BBC is a very nice source for information of exactly what's happening. So that's my key messages for now. I'm going to move on to say we've got brilliant scientists, brilliant GPs. We've brought this together as a community. The key messages are, if you're vulnerable, if you're in these elderly, diabetics, ethnic minorities, etc., such as ourselves, if you've got heart, lung problem, please, please, please stay safe, stay calm, stay aware. Lockdown and wearing masks at the right time before you see anybody really works. Beyond this, the vaccine is going to be critical. And the next part of this handover, I'll hand over to Raj, my good friend, in a minute, who's going to talk about vaccinations. And please worry about long COVID. And the last thing is the flu season. Please have your flu jab. Really critically important that you don't add flu to COVID vaccine. Raj, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and be very positive and have a positive mental attitude. Nemish, thanks for the intro. Over to you, Raj. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Amit. Badane, Jai Jindra, Jai Shri Krishna. I'll talk about vaccines. Sorry. So I'll be talking about vaccines. What are they and what do they do and how do they work? So before I go on to the vaccines per se, let's just make it absolutely clear. Vaccines are not normal medicines. Normal medicines, you get ill through viruses or bacteria, you get a medicine, you get better. Vaccine prevents disease. So you get a vaccine when you are healthy. So when you encounter the bacteria, you do not get ill. It prevents illness. And as it's always said, prevention is always better than cure. So let's talk a little bit about vaccine and the technology. The whole issue around vaccine has been known for centuries ago. A vaccine is essentially something that you get to prevent you from getting that disease further down the line. People in China, India, Middle East actually instinctively knew that if you get some diseases, then you don't get it again. For example, in China and Middle East, they used to do a process called variolation for smallpox. What they did is took a little bit of pus, the RASI, from patients who had been suffering from smallpox, and then gave it to themselves and other people. This created, most of the times, mild infection, mild smallpox, but what it did is it prevented them getting from future smallpox. Similarly, in Middle East, they were doing a process called leishmanization for centuries ago. It's a similar manner. However, what this did is essentially they were trying to give you the disease in a mild form to prevent you getting a worse form of disease. In late 18th century, Edward Jenner realized actually you can give people something which is completely innocuous. It doesn't harm you, it doesn't give you any disease, but still protect you from getting that disease further on. He understood and he noticed that actually cow maids, dairy maids who are working with cows who had cowpox, these maids got cowpox themselves, but the cowpox doesn't give you any disease in humans. What it did, it protected them from smallpox. And from that observation, he developed a smallpox vaccine. Once that breakthrough had happened, i.e. you can inoculate people with something that doesn't give them disease. It's safe, but still protect them from that disease. A lot of other vaccines were developed. Louis Pasteur developed cholera vaccine. There was a gentleman called Waldemar Hafkind who did a lot of good work to prevent cholera in India, particularly in Bangladesh. We've heard of BCG vaccine. That's a vaccine against tuberculosis. And then there's a famous polio vaccine that was originally generated by Jonas Salk and improved by Albert Bruce Sabin. So over the years, there have been many developments about vaccines. And essentially, all these developments are trying to do two things. One is how can we make the vaccine safe? And by each development, you can see on the right-hand side, all of the different ways people are making vaccine. Each development, the vaccines have become safer and safer. And secondly, they're trying to do is, can we make the smallest part of the virus, of the bacteria, that actually generates the immune response that the vaccine is based on? So we don't need the whole virus. We don't need the whole bacteria. We just need a small part, because that small part will not give you any disease, and it will be the safest way of giving you a vaccine. That's what the whole of the development has been about. And actually, that is what has led us to the current technologies that are used to make vaccines. If you look at the history of vaccines and the achievement vaccines have done, it's one of the greatest medical achievements of modern civilization. It saved literally millions of lives. Polio and smallpox. Most of us would have no idea what smallpox was, will never know that anybody who had smallpox, or in fact, how debilitating and disfiguring this disease was. The fact that we don't know that is actually great progress, because that means smallpox has been eradicated from the world. 8th May 1980, the World Health Organization declared smallpox is dead. And this year was 40th anniversary of that. Polio vaccine. In 1988, polio was endemic in over 125 countries in the world. A lot of people in this audience today, the elderly in particular, will have known people who've had polio, and they would know how devastating that disease was. WHO started a polio vaccine program in 1988. And look what happened by 2017, only 3 countries in the world still had polio. And that was only because we couldn't vaccinate people, more people in those countries. What this tells us is vaccine is able to eradicate disease. It's able to eradicate disease, which is pandemic in the world, and that's the only way to fight a pandemic in the world. There are also modern vaccines that people are more aware of, the diphtheria, whooping cough, measles vaccine, especially mothers in our audience will know these vaccines. So for example, measles vaccines, if you look at in 1917, 1968, there were over 200,000 cases of measles in England and Wales. Right? That's when vaccination started. And look at it now, in 2019, there were just over 2,400 cases. A massive decrease in incidence because of vaccination. Vaccines work. Now, I mentioned that there's been a lot of advances in vaccine technologies. Previously, people used to make the virus itself and kill it before injecting into people, or they would make a weaker strain of the virus and inject into people. But more recently, they've been managed to make a lot more safer vaccines. And that's because we understand the virus is much better. In COVID-19 case, we know that the part of the virus that is key for vaccine is a spike protein. So there are 3 main ways people are making these modern vaccines. One is they can make just the protein itself and inject people with the protein. And that will give people, the people's body will then realize that that's a virus and that it will react to it and immunize them. And what an example of people making that vaccine is GSK. Secondly, they take the instructions for making that protein, that spike protein, and insert it into a very completely safe virus, a virus that does nothing to humans. So that virus, it then infects the cells of our arm where it's injected. And again, those cells make the spike protein and create immunity in ourselves. Last but not least, there is the mRNA technology that we've been hearing about in the last few months. That is, again, they take a small piece of instruction to make the spike protein and inject it in our body. And that just a small piece of instruction, the only thing it does is tells our cells to make the spike protein. And that way, our body reacts to the spike protein and creates immunity. Now, how do these mRNA vaccines work in practice? I'm going to go through that very quickly. So if you look at the coronavirus, what it does have is, as we know, there has a spike protein on top of the virus, but inside they have a long molecule of RNA. What RNA is essentially an instructions to make everything that the virus needs to replicate itself. A small part of the RNA over here depicted in red, it codes for instructions to make the spike protein. So what the scientists have done is taken this small part of the RNA, they made it synthetically outside the body, and they've enveloped it in an oily shell. Why oily shell? Because it stabilizes the RNA, and also it allows these particles now to get into the cell, our cells. This is what the coronavirus vaccine, the mRNA vaccines are, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. You will get injected into your arm, and the cells where the mRNA is injected in the arm, the muscle cells, take up this oily particles. The mRNA inside the oily particles get inside the cell. Now, mRNA is not something weird or wonderful substance. All our cells are full of mRNA that gives instructions to make all the rest of our protein, our own protein. All that happens is you just get a bit more mRNA in the cell, which comes with these oily particles. The cell reads those instructions and makes the spike protein. Now, the other thing to notice here is this is mRNA that stays in the cell. It does not enter the nucleus. The cell's nucleus, that a lot of us know, is where our DNA resides. So the mRNA never gets in the nucleus, and hence it's not going to change our DNA. It's not going to cause our mutation in our cells and so forth. Once our cell makes the spike protein, that cell, this muscle cell where we were injected, all of a sudden looks like as if it's been infected with the COVID-19 virus to our immune system. There's no virus in our cells at the moment, but it just looks like that. So it fools our immune system. So a number of our white blood cells, part of our immune system, get kicked in. And what happens is they take up those spike protein and in the end, instruct special cells which make antibodies to the spike protein. So what ends up is we make antibodies to the spike protein. Those antibodies start protecting ourselves from any virus that may come into our body. The one thing to remember, if you think about a spike protein like that, these cells are making lots of different types of antibodies which may bind different parts of the spike protein. So there's a lot of different parts being bound. So if there's small amount which changes of the spike protein, for example, you will still get vaccine protection. As I mentioned, there's an enormous amount of activity undertaking in developing coronavirus vaccines. As you see on the right, lots and lots of activities and different types of vaccines being developed. But one thing that's been absolutely astounding is the unprecedented collaborative international effort. We have never seen such amount of effort by everybody in the world, the pharmaceutical companies, the governments, the researchers, and the amount of funding pouring in for a single disease. Never before has this been achieved. There are a large number of vaccines that have been generated and tested in preclinical setting, i.e. before they go to test in man. And in clinical development, there are over 50 vaccines already. That includes the 2 vaccines that we know, the mRNA vaccines. So we just heard last week and yet week before, the Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA vaccine has been approved for emergency use in UK and US. Moderna vaccine has just recently been approved in US, and it's likely going to be approved elsewhere in the world very soon. Others are not too far behind. There is Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, J&J, GSK, etc. So there's a lot of vaccines coming through the pipeline. They'll be approved soon. What do I mean by approve? So you got to remember, for a vaccine to be approved by a regulatory authority, the regulatory authority has to really review all the data that's generated in the clinical trial very, very carefully. Only if they're convinced that A, it is safe, and B, it is effective, will they approve the vaccine. So let's have a brief look at the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech mRNA vaccines, which are either been approved or about to be approved. These were trialed in large, double-blind, randomized trials. What do I mean by that? Double-blind means neither the physician, neither the doctor, nor the patient, nor the trial participant, the volunteer, knows what is he getting. They could either get the vaccine or get a salt solution, which is a placebo. Randomized means that they're going to be randomized according to the two arms in a random manner. Look at the number of participants in this trial. Pfizer-BioNTech, over 43,000 people. Moderna, over 30,000 people. Right? Half of them were treated with vaccine. So when people say, oh, this hasn't been tested enough, look at the number of people. 15,000 Moderna vaccine people have been tested on Moderna vaccine. 20,000 Pfizer vaccine. And now over hundreds of thousands of people have had this vaccine. It has been tested very well so far. And the results of the trial showed very clearly that these vaccines are giving really, really good protection against infection with COVID-19, 94% to 95%. To put this into perspective, some of the common vaccines we get out apart from COVID-19, some of them actually only have 40 to 60% protection. So this is a superb vaccine. People are always worried about serious side effects of the vaccine. Both the vaccine in the trials, they had very low serious side effects. But crucially, the side effects, this very low number of side effects that we're seeing, were observed in both the treated and the saline group, the placebo group. So it is very, very unlikely that the vaccine is going to give any serious side effects. That doesn't mean it gives no side effects. The common temporary side effects are injection site pain, fatigue, headache, muscle pain. These are common side effects of pretty much every vaccine. What this means is the vaccine is working. When your immune system kicks in, these are the symptoms that you get. So I hope I've convinced you that their vaccines are a phenomenal weapon we have against COVID-19. The Pfizer, Moderna vaccines have been tested very well, rigorously, and they've been shown by regulatory authorities that they are safe and efficacious. Thank you. Now I'm going to hand over to Dr. Rajvi Punatar, and she will be separating facts from fiction.
Thank you, Raj. My name is Rajvi Punatar, and I'm a research scientist. This is where I work at the Francis Crick Institute, which is a state-of-the-art biomedical research centre. And in the Francis Crick Institute, there are 1,250 scientists from 70 countries, and we work on a range of human diseases. And there they are all listed, from cancer to heart disease to dementia, and a whole load of infectious diseases. But of course, when COVID struck, like many other workplaces, our institute was also shut down. But our scientists and our medics that work there decided that they had to do something to help the fight against COVID. And this is what we did. This was our response to the COVID pandemic. Within a few weeks, we set up a testing pipeline. So people could be tested, people who worked in the hospitals and the patients. And we've now completed over 200,000 PCR tests for 10 hospitals and 150 care homes. And the other thing that's happened is many of our research groups are now looking at studying the coronavirus, its effects on the body, and this will help us identify vaccines and new treatments. So many of you will have looked and watched Boris's announcement yesterday that we are going into tier 4. And one of the main reasons is because there is been a new development, a new COVID-19 variant. And I'm just going to quickly tell you a little bit about this because it's very, very topical. So the virus has mutated, and that's why we have this new variant. And people ask, is this unusual? Well, the answer is no, not really, because this is what viruses do. They like to mutate their DNA or their RNA. And anyway, over 1,000 variants have already been detected. Most are harmless and they don't really change the behavior of the virus. What's different about this new strain? Well, the reason that people are a little bit worried is it seems to be increasing more rapidly than any other variant. What that means is that rather than having a mixture of different variants, one is growing much faster than other, and this suggests it's more transmissible. It's easier to pass on to other people. Does this make it more dangerous? Well, we don't know. There's no evidence to suggest that it's more dangerous. However, scientists and doctors are working hard to find this out. Will the vaccines work against the new strain? This is a really important question. At the moment, we don't know. And again, scientists are trying to work this out. There's no reason to believe that the vaccines will not work against this strain. And as Raj described, when we have a vaccine, our bodies make antibodies not just to one part of the spike protein, but to many parts. And the hope is that even if a small part of the protein changes because the DNA has changed or the RNA has changed, that the other antibodies we have will still be able to fight it. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about, the COVID variants. But now I'm going to turn to the vaccine and something that is a little bit more troubling. Many of you may have received messages on your WhatsApp, on your Facebook, on your Twitter, and there may be videos or messages, but many of them contain rather alarming stories or myths about how harmful the COVID vaccine is. And these are the top 3 that most people seem to get. The first one is it will alter your DNA. Another one is the vaccine contains a microchip. And the microchip somehow with 5G technology helps people to be tracked or controlled. I'm not quite sure what the theory behind that is. The third myth is the vaccine contains human fetal tissue. I just want to tell you all right now, this is not the case. This is not true. There is no scientific basis for this. It's not been proven. It is like a rumor. It is like a conspiracy theory. Please, please do not forward or share these videos and messages. But what if you get other type of messages on your phone or you see something on Facebook? How do you know if it's real and how do you know if it's fake? And this is a real problem, and I really understand that it's very difficult for people to know what is real and what isn't. So what I'm going to tell you is what I do when I want to know whether something is fake or real. The first thing I do is I just look at the headline or I look at the story and think, does the story sound believable? Is it there? Is it alarming? Is it there to shock or scare you? A lot of the headlines do that. And if that's the case, then it's probably something you should be very, very suspicious about. The second thing you should ask, has the story been reported anywhere else? And what I do is I just Google for the keywords. So if you got a post about the virus mutates your DNA, literally put that in a search engine and have a look. Does the same story come up on BBC or CNN or Reuters or in the Times newspaper or the Guardian? And if it doesn't, it is going to be most likely fake news. The other thing you can do is Where did this story come from? Was it from a trusted source? So again, what you can do is you can look for a website name, or if it's someone on a video, see what their name is, and again, Google them. If there is no name or no source, then be really, really suspicious, because you can't trust it if you don't know where the story is coming from. And lastly, show it to someone you trust. What do they think? And when I mean someone you trust, if you have a friend or a relative who's a doctor or a pharmacist or a scientist, then just ask them, I've got this message. Is this true? Is it not? But most of all, if in doubt, please don't share or forward any of these posts, because actually they're quite dangerous as well. So now that was dealing with fake news. But many of us have some proper questions and concerns, some valid concerns about the virus. And the most common ones are, how have the vaccines been developed so quickly? Have corners been cut? Are the vaccines safe? This is a very big one. And the third one that I'm going to talk about today is, I am young and healthy. Why do I need to take the COVID vaccine? So let's look at the first question. How have they been developed so quickly? Well, the main reason really is we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and therefore governments, scientists, pharmaceutical companies, and the public have all joined together and cooperated, because we all have one aim. If you think about it, it is to beat the virus. So what does that mean actually in practical terms? First of all, a huge amount of public and private money has been poured into vaccine development in a way that's never happened before. Secondly, scientists and companies across the world have made COVID research and vaccine development their number one priority, almost to the detriment of any other thing that they've been working on. Everything else being put to the bottom of the pile, and COVID is at the top of the pile. Thirdly, clinical trials, and Raj has talked about them, you need thousands and thousands of volunteers to come forward to do clinical trials. And normally this takes months and months, but we've had incredibly fast recruitment. And the main reason is the public wants to help. People have come forward when there's been a call for volunteers, and the use of social media has really speeded this up. The last thing is the different stages of vaccine development were overlapped or carried out in parallel, meaning at the same time. And this is rather different from what used to happen. This is sort of a graphic here showing what used to happen. So all the different bars that you can see, orange, that's the preclinical trial. This is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trial, then the approval process, then the manufacturing. All of this usually happens step by step. You don't start the phase 2 trial until you've got results from phase 1. And similarly, phase 3 doesn't start until phase 2 has been shown to be successful. Then all of this is put in a big report, and it goes to the regulatory bodies here in green. And they will take months, almost a year, to read it and approve it. And then, and only then, do the companies decide they're going to put lots of money in to actually make the vaccine. So you can see in traditional vaccines, this used to take 10 to 15 years. And before this year, the measles vaccine only took 5 years, but that was the fastest one. So what has happened this year? This is what's happened. Everything has been staggered or done in parallel, meaning one phase doesn't finish before the next phase started. And in fact, if you look at the bottom where the manufacturing processes happened, they started making large quantities of viruses. I mean, not just Pfizer, all the companies, even before they knew that it would work and that it would be approved. And this was a huge risk to those companies to do that. But they have done this because we are in the middle of a global pandemic. So all necessary steps were followed, but at a far quicker pace, no shortcuts. Now, this is the next biggest question. Are COVID vaccines safe? So what I would say to you is no vaccine or drug is 100% safe. And any medicine that actually works has unwanted effects. Just go to your medicine cabinet. Do you have ibuprofen in there or paracetamol? Do you have your blood pressure medication there? And what about people on chemotherapy drugs? We all know how many side effects those have, but they save lives. So the benefits of vaccines far outweigh the risks. That's the question. Do they? Do the benefits of vaccines outweigh the risks? So let's have a look at the numbers. Already in the UK, 1 in every 1,000 people has already died from coronavirus. So that's that's 1 in 1,000 of the entire population, whether they've contracted it or not. That's how many people have died so far. And if you catch COVID, your chance of dying is 3 in 100. Now let's look at the risks of a vaccine. What do we know before these vaccines came on the scene? From the WHO, they've estimated that 1 to 2 people per million have a serious allergic reaction, and this is across all vaccines. You are more likely to be struck by lightning or have a car accident than have a serious allergic reaction to a vaccine. So there, I hope I've showed you the benefits of the vaccine far outweigh the risks. And what we found out last week and the week before, 2 messenger RNA vaccines have been given emergency approval by the regulatory bodies here in the UK and the USA. And they wouldn't do this unless they looked at all the data, made sure every step that needed to be done had been done, and then seen that they are safe and that they work. And that's what Raj talked about earlier. And even after they've been approved, the safety monitoring continues. So my last question that most people ask, the most common question, I am young and healthy, why do I need to take the vaccine? Well, Raj and Amit already explained, there is still a risk of death and suffering from long COVID, whether you're young or not. It's a lower risk than if you're older, but the risk is still there. The other thing is, we know 1 in 3 people who catch COVID are asymptomatic. That means they don't show any symptoms, so they probably don't get tested, they don't know they've got it, and therefore they're likely to spread it to others. And a lot of the asymptomatic cases are happening in young people. And then there's the issue of herd immunity. Let me explain what herd immunity is. If enough people are vaccinated, it makes it really hard for the disease to spread to people who can't have the vaccines. You're always going to have some people who can't have them because they're ill or they have a weakened immune system. And what we know for COVID-19 is 60 to 70% of the population will need to be vaccinated to achieve this herd immunity. So in order to reach those figures, we need everyone, whether you're young or old, to be vaccinated. And by the way, the polio vaccine that Raj talked about earlier, it was achieved by herd immunity. So now I want to talk to you what's happening right now. We have just gone into tier 4, right? And we know that we're at a critical stage. In the last 2 weeks, over 350,000 people have received the Pfizer vaccine, and Boris announced this yesterday. In all that time, we know 2 NHS staff members who did get an allergic reaction to it. Both already had a history of strong allergic reactions. They carried an EpiPen, and they are both fine after receiving the appropriate treatment. And since that happened, we know that perhaps people who have this type of allergic reaction should not get the vaccine. So these are the only 2 people that we know of that have had an adverse reaction out of 350,000 people. In the same period, 4,504 people have died of COVID-19. Now this figure is from yesterday. I think there've been more deaths today. Now imagine if we had the vaccine ready 3 months ago, and imagine that all those people did manage to take it. This is a number of people that would be alive today from that figure if they had taken the vaccine and if it had been available. Now, I'm talking to you as a scientist because for me, researching on human disease and finding cures and finding treatments and vaccines is really, really important. But I also have had personal experience. My family has, and this is what I want to talk to you about. A week before the lockdown, on the 16th of March, our family had our first case of what we now afterwards realized was COVID-19. My daughter woke up with a headache and a slight fever. Couple of days later, I started to get cold symptoms. Now, we isolated as a family immediately that my daughter had her symptoms. In March, no one could get tested, so we were taking all precautions. This is my mother-in-law, Samjuben Nagindas Punata, and she'd been living with us for 8 years. We were a very close family, and we were very fearful for her. So we isolated her on the ground floor. She had her own room and bathroom. We wouldn't eat with her. My other children wiped down all the doors and the frames. And, you know, nobody went within 2 meters of her. But what I want to say to everyone is once it comes in your house, this virus is extremely contagious. And no matter what you do, the likelihood is if any of you, any of the younger generations bring it into the house, you are really risking exposing your elders. And my Sasu, a week after we had symptoms and we recovered, she started to cough. And 5 days later, she died. She had those glassy lungs that Amit was showing you the pictures of recently in his first part of his talk. This was the most horrific, tragic thing our family had been through. We were in isolation. We couldn't be consoled. It was so difficult to do anything. When we had the funeral, only 6 of us could attend. And for those of you who've got elders who say, just think about it right now. If your elders go into the hospital with COVID, you will not be able to see them. You won't be able to hold their hand. You won't be able to take food to them. They will be alone and scared. This is not the way to go. There are better ways to go, and I would not wish this on anyone. On the day that my mother-in-law died, which was the 28th of March 2020, there had only been a total of 1,455 deaths in the whole of the UK from COVID. And look where we are today. If my mother-in-law were alive today, I would have spoken to her. I would have told her what I'm telling all of you, and she would have taken the vaccine and she would have been saved. I really believe that at the bottom of my heart. And so I would like to urge everyone to think about taking this vaccine. I will take it, my family will take it, and my mother and father will be taking it. So to talk about how this is going to work, how the vaccination process works, I'm now going to hand over to Mala. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Jinendra. I'm a general practitioner working in Harrow and also an imperial teacher. I have worked during the first wave of COVID and for the last 6 months and seen the COVID firsthand. SARS-CoV has caused significant health problems. Transmission is widespread and has been sustained despite various interventions. The disease itself is associated with the significant disability and death, and not to mention the socio-economic consequences. As the COVID-19 vaccine has been rolled out across the country, NHS is set to enter one of the most challenging periods during the pandemic, and the success of that program lies with you. Our vaccine is safalta or to fight the COVID, tamara hath mache. So far, the other experts have talked about how vaccine works. It's regarding its efficacy, safety, and quality. I'm going to talk more about the delivery of the vaccine. Just before that, let's recap on how does the vaccine work. As Raj and Rajvi has mentioned already, the COVID-19 is a messenger RNA vaccine. It contains a genetic sequence for the spike protein on the surface of the virus, which is wrapped up in a lipid envelope, which is called nanoparticle. It enters the recipient's body via the nanoparticle. It's nothing to do with the chip. I'm going to, the next slide, please. When the messenger RNA is taken up by the host cells, which then produces the spike proteins on the surface, and which prompts the production of antibodies and the T cells. No whole virus or the live virus is used, and the mRNA degenerates in a few days. I'm going to talk about this into Gujarati. કુદરતે અને ભગવાને આપણું શરીર એવું બનાવ્યું છે કે જ્યારે વાયરસ કે બેક્ટેરિયા જેવા દુશ્મન આક્રમણ કરે ત્યારે શરીરમાં રહેલા શ્વેતકણ or the white cells આપણી રક્ષા કરી શકે છે. હવે મુખ્ય મુદ્દો એ છે કે આ શ્વેતકણને ખબર કેવી રીતે પડે કે આ દુશ્મન છે. સો જ્યારે આપણે રસી લઈએ છીએ, રસી મીન્સ વેક્સિન, ત્યારે રસીના માધ્યમથી આપણા શરીરમાં અતિ સૂક્ષ્મ પ્રમાણમાં વાયરસ અથવા તો વાયરસનો નાનો ભાગ દાખલ કરવામાં આવે છે. And occasionally it could be the genetic code or the mahiti of the virus. So કોરોના વાયરસની રસી પણ આવી રીતે જ કામ કરે છે. કોરોના વાયરસની ઉપર એક અણીદાર ખીલા જેવા આકારમાં પ્રોટીન હોય છે જેને આપણે સ્પાઇક પ્રોટીન કહીએ છીએ. ઓલમોસ્ટ એમ કહી શકાય કે સ્પાઇક પ્રોટીન એ વાયરસની ટોપી છે. સો આપણા શ્વેતકણો or white cells અને ઇમ્યુન સિસ્ટમ or ઇમ્યુન પ્રક્રિયાના બીજા ભાગો પણ આ સ્પાઇક પ્રોટીનને જોઈને સમજી શકે છે કે આ દુશ્મન છે. સો નવી રસીમાં એક આરએનએ નામનો પદાર્થ છે which જે સ્પાઇક પ્રોટીન પ્રોડક્શનમાં હેલ્પ કરે છે. આરએનએ બહુ જ થોડા પ્રમાણમાં સેલમાં એન્ટર થાય છે અને સ્પાઇક પ્રોટીનનું પ્રોડક્શન કરે છે. સો રસી લીધા પછી જ્યારે ખરેખર કોવિડ વાયરસ આપણા શરીરમાં દાખલ થાય ત્યારે શરીરની પ્રતિરક્ષા સિસ્ટમ or a defense system બધા જ સૈનિકો સાથે તૈયાર હોય છે. સો it shoots the virus down or દુશ્મનનો નાશ કરે છે. Next one. So let's talk about the misconception which has already been talked about. So unlike the live attenuated virus, one cannot get infected with messenger RNA virus vaccine. mRNA cannot enter the nucleus of the cells where the DNA resides and change your DNA. Another myth or another misinformation. So please don't listen to these misinformations. Antibodies produced are specific to this virus. Messenger RNA only helps make a part of the spike protein and not the entire protein. In other words, you cannot get the COVID-19 because of the vaccine. And having COVID-19 and getting better does not mean you may not contract the virus again. So as it has been mentioned, taking the vaccine will allow the herd immunity. We need 70 to 80% to get the herd immunity, to break the chain and to reduce the spread. So the question is, how do I get a vaccine? Usually to be by the general practitioners or being on a part of the general practice register. It can be provided by the NHS employer or a private care employers. If you are working in the nursing homes or carer organization, they will organize the vaccine for you. State employers or the research study. But one thing is certain, you cannot purchase a vaccine in England and Wales. So the next most important question, who is eligible for the vaccine? The aim of the current vaccination program is to prevent to those most at risk from severe illness or the death from the COVID. Joint Committee of Vaccination and Immunization has prioritized the eligible groups according to the risk. Once the high risk categories are immunized, then we'll move to the lower risk groups. The idea is to vaccinate as many people as possible. The exception is under 16 and pregnant women. So if I just go through the priority group, at the moment, the first priority group would be the residents in a care home for older adults and their care workers, and those aged 80 years and over. અત્યારે 80 વર્ષથી ઉપરના માણસોને અમે બોલાવીએ છીએ અને people living in care home or residential home are given the priority. Then it comes to the all over 75 years of age, Then the fourth category or fourth priority group is all over 70 years plus clinically extremely vulnerable individuals. As Amit already mentioned, these are the people who have either got a diabetes or a chronic heart condition, chronic lung condition, chronic neurological condition, immunosuppressed, and so on. Then comes the all over 65 years of age. Then comes 16 to 64 years, people, healthy adults, but with the comorbidities. Again, comorbidities means another health condition which are making them prone to catching COVID or having the serious effects of the COVID. Then comes over 60 and over 55, following that 55 and over, and then 50 years and over. In short, if you are 65-year-old, reasonably fit and healthy, તમને January or February સુધી vaccination માટે appointment મળે. At the moment, the first priority is 80 years and plus, 80 વર્ષના અને એની ઉપરના માણસો માટે, frontline care workers and the people in the residential care home and their carers. Just wanted to mention a little bit about clinically extremely vulnerable. This is the group which are the one which were shielded during the first wave. They are the one with the chronic lung disease, એટલે તમને ફેફસાની બીમારી હોય, હૃદયની બીમારી હોય, kidney stage 3, 4 or 5, liver problems હોય, some neurological condition હોય, diabetes as well is a huge risk factor, and anyone with the diabetes, even with the diet control, તમે diabetes હોય અને medication ન લેતા હો, તો પણ you come under the clinically extremely vulnerable group. Immunosuppression, so patients with the autoimmune disease who are taking immunosuppressive medication, people with a splenic dysfunction, morbid obesity, particularly the morbid obesity, the people who are extremely overweight and particularly unfit, as Amit mentioned, they are a very high risk of COVID and COVID complication. Severe mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorders, and the younger adults in a long stay nursing or residential care setting, like the people with a learning disability, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, or acute mental disorders will be eligible for the vaccine as well. So the next question which everybody is asking, how long does the protection last? જે immunity છે એ કેટલો વખત રહેશે, or vaccine મને ક્યાં સુધી મારું COVID સામે રક્ષા કરશે? It's too early to tell. Protection may wane over time. So as a result, like the hepatitis or other vaccines, we may need a booster, or it might be like a flu vaccine. We might have to take this vaccine every year. We don't know. As with any vaccine, it may not protect all the recipients, and it depends on your age, gender, your physical condition. Diminished immune response may be observed in immunocompromised people or those receiving immunosuppressant therapy. But ultimately, on balance, by taking vaccine, you increase your chances of developing immunity to combat COVID-19. Vaccine લેવાથી તમારી રોગ પ્રતિકારક શક્તિ વધે છે, અને તે તમને બળવાન બનાવે છે, અને it gives you a chance to fight COVID. So what are the contraindication and side effects? So the main contraindication is the confirmed severe allergic reaction, which required hospitalization to medicine, food, or vaccine. We call it an anaphylactic reaction, which is a severe allergic reaction for which you need hospitalization and sometimes resuscitation as well. To make it simple, if you are carrying EpiPen injections, or if you had to go to A&E because you had some sort of severe allergic reaction, you won't be eligible for the vaccine. Otherwise, the side effects are mild, particularly local side effects are no more than getting a flu vaccination. It's just soreness on the arm, or a little bit of redness, or a swelling, or the arm hurts. હાથ થોડા વખત ભારે લાગે કે દુખે અથવા તો જરા swelling or લાલ થઈ જાય, which are common side effects. 10 or 12 of my colleagues have taken the vaccines and they are all feeling absolutely fine. મેં બધાને પૂછ્યું છે કે તમને શું ડિફરન્ટ લાગ્યું from the flu vaccination, અને most of them said જરા પણ flu vaccination થી different નથી. Some of the systemic side effects are fatigue, એટલે એકદમ થાક લાગે, શરીર દુખે, કોઈક વાર જરાક માથું દુખે. These are a common side effects. એ 3-1 દિવસ ચાલે છે. If it lasts more than 5 days or severe symptoms, then please call GP or a healthcare professional. This is a new vaccine. That's why all the side effects, we would encourage you to put it on the yellow card system. This is for the ongoing monitoring of the COVID vaccine. In short, vaccine is extremely safe. Side effects are minor. Side effects are like almost like having a flu jab. So I would definitely urge you to take these vaccines. It's safe, side effects are minor, systemic side effects are very rare. Now, the nitty-gritty of how the vaccine is stored and how it is prepared. You might have heard that the vaccine requires a -80-degree temperature to store. So, vaccines will be delivered frozen in the ultra-low temperature freezers at -80 to -60. Proper storage, preparation, and administration is very important for the vaccine efficacy. So each pack contains 195 vials with the 5 vaccines, and so it is total of 975 vaccines. When required, frozen vial should be thawed at 2 to 8 degrees. That's a normal fridge. So these frozen vials taken out of the ultra low temperature freezers and then put into the fridge of at 2 to 8 degrees for 3 hours for it to thaw. Then each vaccine needs to be reconstituted with a sodium chloride solution. But the most important part here is once reconstituted, it has to be used within 6 hours. So if you don't attend your appointment and if somebody else doesn't take your place, that vaccine is wasted. 2 doses, for the vaccine to be effective, there are 2 doses which is to be given intramuscularly, usually in the upper arm, but could be given in the thigh and 21 days apart. So just to tell you what is happening in Harrow. I work in a Harrow practice. Harrow has got 30 GP practices and 5 primary care networks. As you know, the vaccination program has started on 15th of December, and the second batch of 975 vaccines have arrived on 17th of December. અત્યારે અમે 80 વર્ષના અને એનાથી વધારે ઉંમરવાળા the older adults have been invited. The older adults living in residential care home and their carers have been invited for the vaccinations, and a lot of them have been vaccinated. I'm going to be taking a part in the vaccination as a vaccinator on Tuesday. I was isolating for 5 days as I went to see my mother, who is 98, who was again socially isolated because of the COVID, and I had to go and see her during this lockdown. So call and recall system has been run by the practices, and this is the number of the Harrow Health Community Integrated Services in case if you need to contact them. Practices will call the eligible patients for screening questionnaire and consent and booking the appointments. At the moment, the vaccination center is at the Hive Stadium, Camrose Avenue, but the next proposed site would be the Byron Hall and Tithe Farm. Just to reiterate, vaccines are extremely precious, extremely effective, and extremely safe. Do not miss your appointment. If you have any problems attending, call your local center or in for the Harrow Health Community Integrated Care.
Malaben, I'm sorry to disturb you. It's we've got so many questions, about 12 pages, and we're running about 25 minutes beyond our time. Would it be possible to try to take some of those questions now? Because
Sure.
I think many of these questions that we've already pre-answered will want to come through. But if we could just stop for a moment. Do you want to go to your last slide, Malaben?
Yeah, sure.
That's it. Do you want to just follow that? Thank you so much, Malaben. Go ahead.
Sure. So just take the vaccine. It's safe, it's effective, and it's the best way to go back to the normality. Do not miss your appointment. As I mentioned, once reconstituted, it has to be used within 6 hours. So if you miss your appointment, there is a fair chance it will be wasted unless this appointment is given to somebody else. And boost your immunity, eat well, exercise daily, and sleep well. Thank you very much. Back to you, Amit.
Thank you. Malaben, while we're moving forward, just go back 2 slides to what happens after the vaccine while I find Nitin Bhai to give a moment's talk. If you go back 2 slides, one more back.
Sure.
That's it. Just leave that on and I'll invite Nitin Parekh. So first of all, thank you so much to all my colleagues and speakers. We've also got today a key people in the audience, and sorry we don't have time for you to talk. Clive Dix, who's the head of the UK Vaccines Programme and a fellow research director. Thank you so much for coming, Clive, today. We've also got Lawrence Gibson, who's the public health consultant in public health for Harrow Council itself. And I think Carol, who's the director of public health, unfortunately it's her birthday, so she couldn't be here. And then we've been very blessed that Nitin Parekh is going to say a minute's word. And Nitin Bhai, do you want to come online and just say something before I wrap up? And if you could stop screen share there, Malaben, just stop screen share. Thank you, Nitin.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. Namaste, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Narendra. I don't really spend much time because I know you got very important topics and questions to be answered. So I'll be very, very quick. Won't take much of the time. But I'm delighted to be here with you in very important topic you're discussing, where at the moment we all know that COVID virus with its new variant is spreading very fast. And just to share with you the latest figure in Harrow, because I'm Harrow Mayor, so I know Harrow figures. Total number of cases in last 7 days were 1,262 cases, which means 464 cases per 100,000 people in the population. So main important, the message which you're getting, please make sure you take care, follow government guidance. I know the professionals are doing their job, but it is our duty as well to do our part by following social distancing, government guidance, and taking the vaccines when you are invited. They're saying, please don't call, wait for invitation. Like my son is a doctor and he took his vaccine only 2 days ago and he's completely fine. So please make sure you take your vaccines. Another important part we should play is follow the guidance and remember hands, face, and space, because that is quite important, because we need virus vaccines to stop it, but we need to follow the guidance and follow the social distancing measures as well to stop spreading the virus. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Navnath for organizing this very important event, and also all the speakers, very informative. Particularly Harrow, where we have 25% of the population is Indian population, and you may not know, Gujarati is the second largest language spoken in Harrow. And finally, before I close down, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for giving me this time to speak and address you all, and hope you have a wonderful, joyous and restful Christmas and Happy New Year to you all. But most importantly, please follow social distancing guidance, government guidance, and celebrate your Christmas safely. Thank you, Emmett.
I couldn't have said that better myself, actually, Nitin Bhai. So that's a fantastic summary, and I'm so sorry to cut in on people's time, and even I was running late. So there's one last slide that I wanted to show before we go into Q&A. First of all, thank you to the many organizations who've done this marketing for us. And look, we've almost at 1,000 actual logins, but in fact, we can see that many people have their families around the screen, so it's well over 1,000 people. We've given you a summary of what the COVID-19 infection will do. It will hurt your lungs, it can hurt your gut, it can hurt many other things and leave you tired later. We've told you that distancing in lockdown works. We've told you beautifully the science of vaccines. Raj has covered that so nicely. Rajvi has covered excellently the safety of vaccines. And what about misinformation, social media? Compare that to the peer review that we go through as scientists for every single thing we have to say. We have to scrutinize it, and we've been doing that internally. Malaben has beautifully told you about the delivery of vaccine and safety, and both in both in Gujarati and in English, something I wasn't able to do, and I'm really sorry about that. So thank you so much, Malaben. You were doing twice the job in English and Gujarati, which is why it was running a little bit late. And then Anuja is going to do this really important thing, which is moderate the questions. But I'm going to remind you how we started this before that, which was trust, truth, and action. Isn't it amazing that the jewels of Jainism, the right faith, the people that you want to believe in, the information, the right knowledge, arriving to do all the right things, and then the most important thing, the right conduct. When you get invited for important things like interventions in a situation where the NHS is giving these things for free to protect you, to protect the resources that we have in the country, and to protect the population and staff, please use those wisely. Anuja, can we hand over to questions? And I'm sorry we're running late. Nemish, let us know. We're going till 9:45 for questions, and then we're going to take more questions that we haven't answered, answer those and put them on the website for Navdat. Is that the correct, I assume that's the correct way to do it, Nemish, and interrupt later if it isn't. Thank you, Anuja. Go ahead.
Thank you all. I'm going to go straight into the questions without wasting more time. So the first question is the most reoccurring theme, most common question asked, and it's for you, Raj. Will we need a booster for this vaccine? And how long will the immunity last?
So you got to remember, I think everyone knows, you will get 2 shots. So you'll get first shot, and between 3 and 6 weeks, you'll get another shot. So that's your booster shot already. It's not planned that you'll need any other shots in the future. How long will it last? We just don't know yet. You got to remember, this vaccine has just been developed. So one of the things as part of the regulatory approval is that these pharmaceutical companies will be monitoring vaccines. So they will be doing research on how long the immunity lasts, how long this lasts. And it may be that we'll have to have another booster shots in a year's time. We just don't know. One of the other question is, will we have to have a flu shots every year, right? You got to remember the flu shot, you have to have every year because the virus changes completely every year. Now, we don't know how COVID-19 will behave. However, we know from our experience of other members of coronavirus, the MERS virus, the SARS virus, they do not change so much. So the hope is that we will not need a shot every year like flu shots for coronavirus. But as I said, it's early days.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you, Raj. And the second most common theme is there any fetal bovine serum as one of the ingredients? Does it conflict with our Jain principles? Is it vegan? Can you comment on that, please?
I will try and tackle that. So first of all, the mRNA vaccines do not contain any animal materials. The vaccine itself is vegan. We've been told now what is exactly in the vaccine, and none of the materials are derived from animal products. However, when you ask the question, is the vaccine vegan? We have to be careful because these vaccines, like any vaccines and any other drugs, will have been tested in animals before it goes to clinical trials, right? So according to each person's ethical guidelines and what they believe in, we need to be careful when we're talking about whether the vaccines are vegan or not. It doesn't contain, at least the mRNA vaccines do not contain any animal materials, but it will have been tested like any other drug on animals.
Thank you. Amit, a question for you as a cardiologist. If someone has high potassium, is the vaccine safe to take? And I'm going to add another one to this. Is taking vitamin D, zinc, or any other immune boosters, such as any other food or herbs, are they going to help me?
Thank you so much. So we know that wherever there's an immune deficiency, if you're vitamin D deficient, then your immune system is going to be challenged. So we know that there are immune boosting compounds such as vitamin D, such as zinc, such as selenium, Brazil nuts, etc. So this is really important for us. And also activity, exercise, flow, these lung exercises that you do, they're also going to help you overcome and prevent any serious infections. So those are really important. Keeping active, keeping exercise, keeping positive mental attitude, absolutely. In terms of cardiovascular disease or any abnormalities, the only people who are not suitable for vaccines at the present time, there is a list. You must always look through the summary of product characteristics for any therapy that you're giving to somebody. So people who are going to get anaphylactic reactions, so those people are currently not to be given vaccines in normal circumstances, but we will work out how to do that in hospital settings, in more complex settings. The immunocompromised, seriously immunocompromised, so that even the slightest infection might actually tip them over. Again, we will be looking after those in hospitals and not to be in primary care. So in primary care, most people who are going to be invited will have been screened and checked that they're all eligible for the vaccine. Potassium is not a problem. Injections of steroids is not a problem. Taking oral steroids is not a problem. Even HIV drugs, even patients with hepatitis, as long as they're stable chronic conditions, you're not ineligible for the vaccine. You can come ahead and get that protection.
Thank you. You've talked about immune boosting. What about steam inhalation?
Yeah, any of those conditions. So be careful where you do your stimulation. So if it's at home, nobody else is in the house, nobody else could possibly give you COVID, that's fine. But steam inhalation procedures in public areas, that they're of course to be avoided. We're avoiding any procedures in hospitals that would create steam inhalation that maybe that people with COVID are actually expressing COVID-19 into that steam. So, but any exercises that you're doing to strengthen your lung, absolutely important. Strengthen your diaphragm, strengthen your upper body. You know, we are so blessed with yoga exercises. Please do them. And we can see that we've done them in Zoom. Navnath has been doing them, you know, every single week, which is fantastic. So please carry on with those.
Okay. And in your experience, is IBS a side effect of COVID?
Yeah, so we know about 20 to 30% of people who get a COVID pneumonia are actually getting gut symptoms. In fact, some people mainly have gut symptoms and actually they got over the breathing part completely. So yes, irritable bowel syndrome, diarrhea, weak motions, not feeling good, bloating, wind, all of those things are not uncommon after a COVID-19 infection. So absolutely.
Thank you. Raji, I'm coming to you next. Is it a live vaccine, and is it safe for someone who can't normally take the flu vaccine to take this particular vaccine? For example, if they're in remission from a condition like multiple myeloma or cancer.
Okay, for the first part of the question, it's not a live vaccine at all. So it's just mRNA inside a lipid molecule, so it's not live. For the second part of the question, I'm afraid I can't answer that, so I don't know, Amit, if you can take that.
Yeah, just repeat that for me, Anuja. So cancer patients who are, for example, in remission, absolutely no problem whatsoever. So providing you're not actively immunocompromised right now, so if you're right now having chemotherapy, that's a problem. But if you've completed everything, you're stable, absolutely not a problem. We've had those patients in the vaccine studies.
Anuja, just one point on that. This is a critical point, that these vaccines, they're subunit vaccine, they're a small part of the virus. It's not the virus. That's why they're a lot safer than live vaccines for a lot of people.
Thank you. And I'll stay with you, Raj. Are any volunteers in the trials were they immunocompromised?
We don't know that yet. I don't know that information. I'm sorry, but I can follow that up. But immunocompromised people in general are not ineligible.
Yeah.
It depends on specific conditions. So if in doubt, talk to your GP ahead of time so you know whether you're going to get the vaccine or not.
Thank you. Talking of GPs, I'm coming to Mala now. If someone has an allergy, such as allergy to penicillin or ibuprofen, or even fruits, nuts, or gluten, is it a contraindication to the vaccine? The allergies to the nut or the gluten is not itself a contraindication. If the allergies is that severe that the person needed a hospital admission for the intramuscular adrenaline or for the resuscitation or for the IV fluids or hydrocortisone. And then as a result, they have been given EpiPen on a regular basis, they will not be eligible. But the otherwise nut allergy or the gluten sensitivity is not a contraindication. They can safely take the vaccine.
Thank you. And a specific question, can you take the vaccine if you have autoimmune conditions or primary biliary cholangitis or asthma?
Matla, do you want to take that one, or shall I help you with that one?
For patients with the asthma definitely can take the vaccine, and actually they will be benefited from the vaccine. The same thing with the autoimmune condition, primary biliary cirrhosis, if it is for that, depending on what stage of primary biliary cirrhosis, but as far as I can see, they can take it. Amit, do you want to add anything?
Absolutely. It's a very common theme that people are asking, look, I've got these conditions, will they interact with the vaccine process, etc. Chronic stable conditions, as long as your condition is stable, and if you're not overly immunocompromised that you can't actually, you're in a hospital setting, if your neutrophil count is really low and you're not able to mount a reaction to anything that might trigger something that's going to give you a fever, then those are the only people. If you're antibiotic allergies, not a problem. If you're having steroids, not a problem. If you're having HIV drugs, not a problem. Okay, it's only if you're very, very, now if you have any doubt, ask your hospital consultant, because you'll be under one if you're severely immunocompromised. Okay, so that's quite important. Otherwise, you're unlikely to be that sort of problem. But any issues, the health professionals will look this up. We've got resources like this panel that can help you.
Thank you. Raj, I'm coming back to you. As both Pfizer and Moderna vaccine are mRNA vaccines, what is the difference between the two? And is the Oxford vaccine better than the Pfizer one? And which is the best vaccine to take?
First of all, between Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, there's very little difference between the two. The difference is only the instructions that create the spike protein. They're very minor differences. As you've seen from the trial results, they are both just as safe and just as efficacious. So I wouldn't consider them to be very different at all. Now, when you compare mRNA vaccines with vaccines like AstraZeneca vaccine, which is coming from Oxford, which is a DNA viral vaccine, we don't know enough about that yet. Now, some of the early results says it may be less efficacious than the Pfizer vaccine, but we need their trials to complete. One thing I would say, though, doesn't matter whether it is slightly more efficacious or less efficacious. If you get invited to get the vaccine, so long as it's been approved by regulatory authority, that means it's safe. Just take the first one that comes along.
Thank you. And do you know how many pharmaceutical companies are producing the COVID-19 vaccines? And were there any deaths in the trials, especially in the Moderna trial?
Yeah, so there are over 150 companies manufacturing or testing the trials. A lot of them are still in preclinical stage. As I mentioned, there are about over 50 vaccines which have been trialed currently, each produced by a different company. So lots of effort here. Deaths in trial, need to be careful about it. This is one of these kind of myths that Rajvi talked about, right? The headline, oh, there were 13 deaths in Moderna trial. Now let's take that a little bit further and investigate that, okay? What does that mean? So that means that people who entered the trial, of the 30,000 people, 13 people died. Now, statistically, if you have 30,000 people, people are gonna die, not necessarily of the vaccine. And actually, when you look at the data, out of the 13 people, 7 people who died had actually the placebo, i.e. the salt water. Only 6 people who died were on the vaccine. So when there's a headline figure, 13 people died in a trial, you really have to go down to the level of detail there. So what is that about? What that tells you is actually that none of these deaths are due to the vaccine. It just happens. People die if you have a large enough sample.
Thank you.
And Raj, we're going to devote another session in the future when we've got all of the large 3 trial data results. So there's going to be an update to this session. For us as scientists, as researchers, as clinicians, this is as important to us, understanding the difference. But you must not wait. Every month, Raj, we showed you very elegantly, every month you wait, you're increasing your risk of getting COVID-19. And that's absolutely critical. In Harrow, there's been a 50 times increase, 5,000% increase, which is what the mayor told you. So really, you must not delay if you're invited.
I'll stay with you, Amit. Why are some countries not affected as like we are, like in the Middle East? Is it due to global warming, chemicals, or air pollution?
This is a really complex question, which has got several parts to it. Number one, we are really good in this country at documenting everything. So our records are there, so we can actually track our death rates very closely to 2 or 3 weeks from registration. So we know all our deaths from March to August very accurately, and each month we're building up statistics. So number one, we're reporting really well. Number two, we have space issues. 8 million people in London, they're always going to cross over each other. Where you've got more geographical space, you're okay. Number three, the diets and the sun and the vitamin D levels and the immunodeficiencies. So if people are not so immunocompromised. But remember, what's really interesting is that the society that you're in, that where people that are older with more complexities can live normally, they're the ones that are going to get more affected by COVID-19. The average age of people in the UK is 81 to 83. That's your average lifespan. So you're going to have more complexities. In other countries, the average lifespan is only 60 or 70. Yeah. So there's completely different ways of comparing this, the standardizing of mortality. But in this country, 2, 3 to 4% is the mortality rate.
Thank you. Mala, a question here. My 84-year-old father with a history of stroke and heart attack has not been invited for the vaccine, but other younger people have. When will he be invited? I'm not sure where he lives, and it's probably too specific question for you to answer, but can you shed any light on it?
I'll take that question. He should have been invited. I just don't know whether he has slipped through the net. I would ask the daughter-in-law or a younger member of the family to call the GP surgery and make them aware. He has to be, and he should be in both the ways. He's over 80 and he's in the critical risk group as well. So he should be on the list. The only thing I could think about it, if he's housebound, then there was difficulty in transporting this vaccine to the housebound patient. That might be a reason why he hasn't been vaccinated. But that has been ironed out because they are taking the vaccines to the care homes now. But Pfizer vaccine is difficult to take it for a single person at home. So just speak to the GP and they will shed some light.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also in some, being a GP myself, in some areas, they probably haven't started and they're going to start, in January. So I suspect that the appointment will be coming very soon. Also, how do we know which vaccine is offered to us and can we choose?
Raj, you want to say?
Yeah. My understanding is we will not have a choice.
And that's because batches are being delivered in a certain way and they must be utilized as quickly as we arrive. Remembering, we're not going to be able to get all of the vaccine we require, the 100 million doses in 1 month, and then say, hey, we've got everything, now we're going to invite you in. You're going to get batches of things delivered. Now you will always be told which vaccine you're getting. There's a consent process and you will have a card and you'll be coming back in 3 weeks for the second dose, etc. So you'll always be told.
And your GP will also get informed. So wherever you've had it, the GP will get informed. So for any reason, if you've lost your card, you cannot always trace back as to which vaccine you've had. And for some reason, if you still don't know which vaccine you've had, it's okay to have another vaccine as a second dose, and it's not detrimental. Even if it's the AstraZeneca one, it's not detrimental. If for some reason, if you don't know, obviously it's best to go with the same vaccine, but it's still okay.
Yeah, so what you can't mix the doses, but if you've not had your 2 doses of one virus, you can start again with another virus.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's most of the questions covered, and I think we've covered most of the questions. So.
Thank you so much. So Anuja, you're doing an amazing job. I mean, we've had 15 pages of comments. That's fantastic. We've got a little bit of time actually. So Anuja, Raj, Rajvi, you're okay? you want to head out?
I think we need to wrap up, Amit.
We need to wrap up, yeah.
Thank you so much. So in which case, it's my joy to invite the president of NVA, I'm so sorry, to give the last comments and thanks. And from us, it's been a joy to help you. It's been a joy to serve you and share the information. For us, this is really important that you've made it here. Thank you so much for your time. And please take it away. Dilip bhai. Thank you so
Jai
much.
Jinendra, Jai Shri Krishna and Pranam. People who don't know me, my name is Dilip Vithalji Mithani, and I'm the president of Navnak Vanik Association of UK. I would like to first thank all my members and their families and friends who have attending this lecture in a very large numbers. Nearly 980 devices were logged in tonight. And I really like to inform them that please share any information that you have got today with your friends and families who have not yet logged in. So thank you for that. Thank you to all the key leaders who are here for attending, as Amit Bhai Bakai has already said, but thank you for that. I cannot forget my committee. Thank you to my committee members who have worked very hard, especially Nemish Bhai Mehta and our Zoom team. They are always here. Whenever we want them, they are there. So thank you very much for your hard work. Thank you to all the wonderful medical and science panel. Seriously, it was very informative and brilliantly done. Seriously, very, very well done. We are blessed. They are looking after our health and promoting prevention and positive behavior and removing so many of our worries, misconceptions, and doubts about the COVID vaccines. So thank you for that. Thank you. And all of you, please stay safe. Remember, wash your hands, face, and space. It's very important. Please stick to the guidelines of government guidelines. Very important during this Christmas holidays. Jai Jinendra and Jai Shri Krishna. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilip bhai. Over to you, Nemish. Zoom team, you've done a fantastic job. Thank you so much, everyone. I think we're going to close up now. Please stay safe. Please enjoy. There is incredible hope that's coming around the corner. Thank you for attending these sorts of events, and let us know if you'd like more. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.